Good morning, everyone. I want to thank Nan Woodruff and the program committee for putting together this panel and for asking me to be a part of it. It's a real pleasure to be here and able to discuss my work alongside others whose work I've really benefited from. I want to focus my remarks today on the South and modern conservatism, and particularly on the role of white Southerners in fueling the conservative resurgence since the 1960s. And as part of that, too, to speak more generally on the role of race in modern conservatism, or white racism in particular. My book that came out in 2007 that Nancy mentioned is one of several books. As probably many of you know, this collection of recent literature on the South and modern conservatism, books by my colleague Kevin Cruz, my colleague, kind of generally speaking, we're not the same person, Matt Lassiter, Bill Link's biography of Jesse Helms, Jason Sokol, Joseph Lowndes. All of these books have kind of plumbed the history of the role of the South and the origins of modern conservatism. One of the themes of these works, not all of the works, but some, is a confrontation with the issue of Southern exceptionalism. And that was certainly an issue that I was very concerned about in my own work on the state of Mississippi, which has so often been framed as in the terms of Jim Silver's 1964 book, Mississippi, the Closed Society. Jim Silver was a historian at the University of Mississippi who was an eyewitness to the kind of racial totalitarianism that existed in Mississippi in the 1950s and 60s. And he documented that, and he was an important eyewitness that has exposed a lot of the insanity of massive resistance during those years. And it's become part of a larger narrative that we tell about the civil rights movement, that Mississippi is the place where nonviolent activists faced down Gothic, white racists, and in doing so, shamed the nation into living up to its commitment to equality for all its citizens. And I don't think that narrative is wrong necessarily. I just think that narrative is limited, and that's what I tried to talk about in my book, in my first book. I think it obscures a lot of other narratives that we could tell about the civil rights era. Narratives such as the story of how, in the case of my book, white Mississippians strategically accommodated themselves to civil rights demands, and in doing so helped forge a kind of popular reaction in the late 60s and 70s that linked the racial conservatism of white Mississippians with other white Americans. And so in that first book, I'm kind of playing around, picking at the edges, if you will, muddying the waters, maybe we'd say, for Mississippi, of Southern exceptionalism. Without denying the fact that there were some ways in which the South and Mississippi in particular were very exceptional and were unique from other places, in ways in which white Mississippians were unique in their racist reaction. Others of this recent turn in the literature have kind of provide a more frontal assault, if you will, on Southern exceptionalism as a concept. Matt Lassiter, in particular, kind of rejects the Southern strategy thesis and the kind of exceptionalism that's implicit in it, and wants to move more towards a suburban Sunbelt model of explaining. He believes that the exceptionalist, the view of the exceptional white South and its racism as being the key to modern conservatism's rise, obscures a much broader process in which the political economic shifts of the post-World War II period created the rise of the Sun Belt and suburban communities that were much more important as the locus of the kind of conservative actors that came to the fore. Now, mine is, as I would say, I think I distinguish myself from Lassiter in that I'm still willing to hold on to certain aspects of a unique Southern story. Now, in my early drafts of my remarks for my comments today, one of the things I found myself doing is that, and maybe this is common for first-time authors, is that I was using a lot of my time as a kind of rebuttal to different criticisms of my book. So I have at home on my computer, fully crafted responses to the various book reviews I have received. Fortunately, I came to my senses and realized nobody's particularly interested in hearing those responses. But maybe I'll just post them on my Facebook page. But instead, I think I'll move forward and talk about and outline briefly my next project, which, as Nancy said, is a political biography of Strom Thurmond that I'm tentatively calling Strom Thurmond's America. And it's still very much wrapped up with this issue of the exceptional South. And I think it's a vital issue that I'm continuing to write about it because I think it continues to affect how scholars, as well as how many conservative activists themselves, think about the role of white racism and racial inequality in the origins of modern conservatism. I think it's very tempting. It's a very tempting trope for conservative pundits. The trope emerges in at least two different ways. This idea that white Southerners weren't central in the origins of modern conservatism. It really was about libertarian Westerners or Cold War migrants to the Sun Belt. It was about intellectuals and writers for the National Review or Human Events. Key figures were, kind of lapsed liberals, neocons, who were in reaction to the failed ideas of a sclerotic New Deal liberalism. Another kind of version of this trope is that when white Southerners are part of the narrative, that they were the carriers of the racist gene within modern conservatism, and they were responsible for some of the regrettable ways in which racism figured into conservative politics. But they were different from other conservatives who were free of this kind of racist taint. And these kinds of sentiments have appeared in public forums prominently in the last 5, 6, or 7 years around public controversies about the history of modern conservatism. I'm thinking here of the Trent Lott incident in 2002, in which Lott, the 100th birthday party of Strom Thurmond said the nation would be better off if they voted with Mississippi in '48. And the kind of response, from people like Charles Croftheimer, saying, who let this guy, in the building, and that kind of thing. Trent Lott is not reflective, but he's not within the mainstreams of conservative thought, even though he was the leader of the Senate. It also came up in the debate on the New York Times editorial page in 2007 about Ronald Reagan's appearance in the Neshoba County Fair, where David Brooks defends Reagan's appearance there, and really kind of distinguish. Brooks said in that piece that racism was a part of that wasn't part of Reagan, and again trying to distinguish between kind of a Californian like Reagan and the kind of folks that he would have been talking to in Neshoba County. But it's not just in David Brooks or Charles Croftheimer. If it was just them, it would be one thing. But I think the notion of white Southerners as fundamentally a different kettle of fish from other white conservatives is an assumption that undergirds some recent works on modern conservatism. And I think there are a lot of different examples you could use of this. But one that I would just point out would be a book that I think is an excellent book. I've learned a lot from. It's one of the earliest books in this trend of literature, one of the most highly regarded, Lisa McGear's book on Orange County, in which she argues in that book that, quote, the racial issues, that for her folks in Southern California, racial issues did not occupy the same prominence in the life, ideas, and politics of Southern California as they did in the former Confederate states in the 1960s. And I wouldn't argue with the fact that there are distinctions that can be made. I think it's fair for McGear to say that whites in Southern California were not reared in the mythology and the memory of racial struggle in the same way that, say, white South Carolinians were. And that's true enough. But I think McGear, she goes on. She says, racial issues were far more central to the texture and fabric of Southern politics and to that region's conservatism. In Orange County, McGear argues racist reaction was, quote, only one of a host of issues in a broader conservative package. And in the South, we are to assume from this formulation, racism was not merely one of a host of issues, but was the issue. And conservative white Southerners' Cold War anti-communism, their anti-labor politics, their conservative religious beliefs, staunch opposition to liberal church groups, their criticism of judicial activism, their hyper-militarism, all of this was merely a function of their desire to maintain white supremacy. I think this assumption is one of the central ideas that I try to take on in this work that I'm doing on Strom Thurmond.